Hello, I am Jay Kavishwar, Deputy Director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. It's my privilege to welcome you to today's Talking to Our Time program with artists Maren Hassinger and Senga Nengudi in conversation with our Senior Curator, Evelyn Hankins. Thank you, Maren and Senga, for joining us. The Hirshhorn is grateful to Susan Inglet Gallery, Levy Gorvey, the National Portrait Gallery, Golden Triangle, and the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative for their generous support of today's program, and Maren and Senga. On October 7th, the National Portrait Gallery will screen Maren Hassinger's Birthright and host a conversation with curator Charlotte Ickes. Next May, the National Portrait Gallery will debut a newly commissioned piece by Maren as part of the museum's Identify program dedicated to performance art. Additionally, in partnership with the Smithsonian Women's History Initiative and the Golden Triangle Business Improvement District, Maren is installing Monument in Washington's DuPont Circle this fall. And Senga Nengudi's seminal work, RSVP-X, was recently on view in our exhibition, Masterworks from the Hirshhorn Collection. Now in our fifth decade, the Hirshhorn is our National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. As we will see today, even as a virtual museum, the Hirshhorn remains a vibrant and vital space where artists and art lovers come together. Our multi-decade connection and collaboration with our audiences and the artists we work with is a wonderful linkage to Maren and Senga's multi-decade collaboration, the theme of today's conversation with Evelyn. I hope you will continue to join us through #HirshhornInsideOut until we can come together again in the museum. Go to our website to discover art-making challenges for kids and adults, inspired insights on the collection from our world-class curators, and exciting video content sharing artworks and the voices of artists. If you'd like to be the first to receive invitations to upcoming happenings, please sign up for our email. Before we begin, I gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. Now, please enjoy today's discussion with Maren Hassinger, Senga Nengudi, and Evelyn Hankins. On behalf of our Hirshhorn family, to you and your loved ones, please take care, and we wish you well.
Thank you, Jay. So thank you again for everyone for joining us. I am really honored to have the opportunity today to talk with Maren Hassinger and Senga Nengudi. Maren and Senga have garnered international acclaim, not only for their respective cross-disciplinary practices, which span sculpture, video, performance, and public art, but also for their long-standing collaboration with each other, which dates back to the early 1970s when they were both living and working in Los Angeles. Their ongoing dialogue and creative partnership, which was initially grounded in their shared study of dance and movement, has taken many forms over the decades and has resulted in a singular, powerful body of work. It has also catalyzed their individual practices in countless ways. Personally, I've been interested in both Senga and Maren's work for a number of years now, and only became more so after the Hirshhorn acquired an example of Senga's seminal RSVP sculptures several years ago. And while curating virtually definitely has its challenges, one of the great unexpected pleasures is the opportunity to put together programs with artists on my dream list, such as this one. So without further delay, and now that we have everyone, I would like to welcome Senga and Maren. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're happy to
So good, we're happy to have you. So I'd like to start by just talking about how you both met. After you were both went to graduate school in Los Angeles, you both became members of Studio Z, which was a fluid collective that kind of gathered around David Hammond's studio. And I think Senga shared that studio for a period of time as well. Could you talk a bit about Studio Z, how it came about, what was unique about it, and then how the two of you decided to start collaborating together?
Well, I came to Studio Z after, I think David had probably left town by that time. But Senga and I got together via a phone call. She just found my number from a friend and called, and we had this long conversation. And that was the beginning of many, many, many conversations and many performances and various gatherings. So our Studio Z was virtual. like this.
Senga?
Well, I first was aware of Maren when I went to an exhibit of hers at the Arc Center. And it was exciting because it was the first Black woman who ever had a solo show there. And so I was really thrilled, and I went with a friend and I said, oh, I think that's the artist over there. And you know, we didn't meet at that point, but we met through a CETA program, which was sort of like the WPA for the 1970s through Alonzo Davis's gallery. And we were each separately chosen as artists to you know, do a community art piece, artwork. And that's how we initially met and chatted about, you know, our commonalities, which certainly are both dance and sculpture.
Right, and
And
so
then-
Studio Z, oh, go ahead.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, so Studio Z, what was Studio Z exactly? It was so incredibly important, but I think it's not as well known. Now Dig This, the show that the Hammer did, brought attention and scholarship to it, but I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, I think the myth is wider and larger. It grows and grows and grows, which is fabulous because, you know, all the artists in it were wonderful, and it was based basically at David Hammond's studio. There was a studio around Slauson, kind of at 54th Street. And his studio was a building that originally was.
Well, it was originally, it may have been a dance hall. I don't know. It was upstairs. It was very big. It had wonderful wooden floors. And I know when I went to do a performance there, David's pieces were on the wall. You know, some of his greasy paper bag pieces were on the wall.
Right.
And Senga had been working with David more closely than I did and had been using the space more than I did. But on one particular morning, the people that I had been taking dance classes with for a few years, we decided to do, you know, a performance, and Senga was part of that performance. And it was, we all had on white pants and shirts, and the performance area was the length of one body stretched out on the floor. And then we made, you know, we made 4 sides based on the length of that body, and then we performed within there. And it was improvisational, and the only props we had were, I believe, were branches.
Right. Well, that's a great lead into your work. If we could have the first slide, please. This is an example of Maren's work. It is called Rain. It's from 1974, and I think it's really a wonderful example of the way that you use industrial wire rope. You twist it, you fray it, you unravel it, and so what becomes obvious is that its qualities like fiber art. And these works tend to be very poetically spare and abstract, yet they resonate with the movements of nature. And I think it's reflective not only of your experimental approach to materials, but also the kind of humanistic and ecological ideas that run through much of your practice. So talk to me a little bit about why wire rope and what you were thinking about at the time. I mean, I think of LA in the early 1970s, and it's this landscape that's changing rapidly between freeways and the aerospace industry. Could you talk about these a bit?
Well, I grew up in LA, so I mean, things were happening that maybe seemed like big changes, but it all was just one kind of smog-filled moment for me. The reason why I became an artist and the reason why I used wire rope had a lot to do with actual negativity. I set out to be a dance major at Bennington College, and I was not accepted as a dance major. And the art department really liked what I was doing, so I was accepted as a sculpture major. Then I applied to UCLA for graduate school in the sculpture department, and I was denied entrance into the sculpture department. But the man who was starting the new fiber arts graduate program said, would you like to come and work with me? And his name was Bernard Kester. And I just got involved with the class because I was able to get an MFA and teach school because that's how I intended to support myself. And all of that really worked out. But what didn't work out were my initial, trying to be a dancer, trying to be, a sculptor, trying to be all these things. And I sort of just let fate happen, I guess. And I ran into some wire rope in a junkyard on Alameda Street in Los Angeles. And, I was in Bernard's class getting my MFA, and I just started using that material. I mean, I was just open to using stuff, and it evolved. And it became very much like nature for me. It became very much like fiber work, but it was also very sculptural. I mean, still, I've still got this piece. It's in the same exact condition, So I guess that whole long conversation is to say, stick with your dream and make it work.
Make the work and keep at it. Thank you. Yeah. If we could have the next slide, please.
I know, Senga different,
She has a different story, which we'll talk about through this. This is a work by Senga that's actually in the Hirshhorn's collection, which I mentioned earlier. It's called RSVPX. It's from the mid-1970s, and it is an extraordinary example of the performance-based sculptures that Senga makes out of used nylon stockings. She manipulates them. You stretch them, you knot them, you twist them, then you weigh them down with sand and other materials, and then you attach them to the surrounding architecture. One of the things that I've always been drawn to them, why I've been drawn to them, is the fact that I'm attracted and repulsed by them, if I may say so. Like they are sensual and tactile, but they are haunting, and frankly, they remind me of my own body sometimes. The title, RSVP, is Respondez s'il vous plaît, please respond in French, which is a direct invitation for active participation on the part of the viewer. So akin to the question that I asked Maren Senga, would you talk about the origins of these works and why nylon stockings? Like Maren, you both managed to leverage really unusual, unconventional materials to make your sculptures.
Yeah, you just said that they're haunting, and sometimes how did you describe it just a moment ago?
They're sensual and tactile, but they also remind me of my own body as a middle-aged woman.
Yeah, and there was something else you mentioned, and that one thing that's missing is a lot of times when people first saw the work, particularly men, they'd laugh and giggle, and then they'd step back and they go, oh, wait a minute. So wow, you have all these mixed emotions when you view it. But I think this is a story that a lot of people already know, that I was pregnant with my first child, and I was fascinated by the things that go on in your body, the stretching, and including your psyche, not only, your body. And then once you had this new life, your body amazingly usually went back into, its regular form. So I was fascinated with elasticity of the skin, of the body, and so on. And I searched around for a lot of different materials to try and get that feeling, that sense that I had gone through. And finally I happened upon nylon mesh pantyhose, and I tried to dip them in resin. I tried to do everything to preserve them. but like the body, it cannot be preserved, even with mummies. So I just went for it with the sanction of Linda Good Bryant, who ran, I should say. It's still in my mind as a something that still is just above Midtown Gallery in New York.
Right.
And she said, just go for it. And so I did.
Yeah, well, I think when you talked about how men would often approach them and giggle at them, I think one of the things I love about your work is that, they can be read through a specific lens depending on the viewer, but in fact, they are more multivalent than stable. There are these works that offer many different ways in. And I think when I was trying to describe the works, when I was talking about them, I'm like, well, which way do I go in? And I think that's one of the great strengths of both of your works, actually. Yeah. And I know it's important, right?
Yeah, and it's, when someone views the work, I'm hoping that it's a personal experience that they can feel, because it's skin-like, it's body-like.
Right.
They can feel the emotions in the piece.
Right. So one of the most well-known facets of your collaboration is when Maren performs your sculpture, Senga. I read recently that it first happened in 1977. It was the first public performance, I think, and I understand that both of you performed the sculptures. But can you talk a little bit about how these performances developed? Because improvisation is, like you mentioned it in terms of Studio Z, but improvisation grounds both of your practices, particularly your movement practices. And we're going to see a video in a second, but before we do, I'd like to just ask, is Maren, do you talk about it? Do you talk about ideas each time, or is it Maren improvising? Does the way you do this change over time? I'm really curious.
Well, it depends on the piece. And with Studio Z, I don't know what happened. Did I just blank out earlier?
No, you're still on. Yeah, you did, but you're good now.
Earlier on, the screen.
Well,
she froze up again. Maren.
But she was about to describe how sometimes we go back and forth, do this, do that, and sometimes we really plan it. Sometimes it's improvisational, and it's always interesting. And I don't exactly get nervous, but I wonder if I can stretch as much as I need to. I often wonder that, And
right.
I think it's such a unique thing. I've never seen anybody ever do anything like this before, ever. No,
and it confounds museums, I'll tell you that. I mean, the thought of you performing a piece in our galleries, I think would make our conservators nervous. But while we're waiting for Maren to come back, why don't we show this video? It is a 2014 performance at White Cube, and Maren is actually performing our piece. So if we could show that video. Nice to see you again. So Senga, since we lost you there for a second, Maren spoke briefly about how she improvises or how it changes each time, but could you talk a little bit about the process where you start to think about what Maren's going to do or what you talk about before one of these performances?
Yeah, I talk about the elements that I'm working with, which would be the elasticity, the resilience, you know, being sometimes trapped with what, you know, life's issues. And then we kind of go through kind of improvisational exercises with the piece in preparation for the actual performance. So it's very much getting a relationship with the piece, being a part of the piece, seeing what the piece wants you to do, and répondez s'il vous plaît. You know, it's a back and forth that occurs, and it's like, well, probably people today don't remember, but Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. It's that ultimate pairing, where each one is sensitive to the other, in this case, the material to the activator, and they respond, and then it opens up from there.
Right. Maren, do you want to add anything else before we move on?
I guess it would be like having a partner, you know, give and take. Mm-hmm.
Right. That makes sense. Could we have the next slide, please? Now, Senga, this is a performance from 1978 that you did, keeping on the theme of performance. It's called Ceremony for Freeway Fets, and Fets being fetishes.
Right.
It actually took place under an interstate in Los Angeles, and it had members of Studio Z. They performed movement and music, and there were sculptures and things on the pilings, and there were also costumes that design. And the way it's written about is that people talk about how it brings together a lot of the things that you were thinking about at the time, or were influenced by, kabuki, Japanese kabuki, to jazz, Yoruba rituals, and thinking about the impact of racial oppression in America. Could you describe what's happening in these two photographs? Obviously, you can't describe an hour-long performance with two photographs, but talk a little bit about these. And then talk about the idea of ritual that runs through a lot of your art.
Well, on the left, those are members of Studio Z. Maren is covered with white, you know, with a white item there, and holding one of my little pieces, and David Hammonds is over there. And so even though everyone there, every person in Studio Z was an artist, they also were musicians at that point for that particular performance. And I chose that particular area under the freeway. You know, the freeway is classic for LA, but this particular area had a very African feel to it. It was dirt and little palm trees and so on. So it had a particular energy to it. And the sense of ritual is, for me, creating something because you want a very specific outcome. You know, brushing your teeth in the morning is a ritual, and you want the outcome of having pretty white teeth and a nice breath. So, you know, even though that's simplified, that's kind of what a ritual is. It's creating ways of doing that then create an outcome that you want.
And on the right, that is you, correct? Could you talk about that, what you're wearing and what you were doing at that point?
Well, that was a paper tarp from one of the local improvement stores. I love using those because they're inexpensive, they're fast, and they have an impact. So, and they're not so precious that you're afraid, you know, something will happen to them. So that's what that was. And I created a headpiece to go with it.
Right. And Maren?
That's Maren over there.
Right. And Maren, from a performer's perspective, you want to talk about this? What it was like, what you recall about this performance?
Oh, well, I'll talk about it. But the thing that's really interesting about it, it was in satisfaction of us having been part of this public art project for Brockman Gallery Productions. And that was Alonzo and Dale Davis's gallery. And we got a seat at Title VI, I think it was, funding. and we were all supposed to make public sculpture. And Senga's public sculpture culminated in this performance. This was sculpture. And I don't think Brockman Gallery was terribly happy with the idea that a performance would be the sculpture. But in reality, I made sculptures that, well, one of them stayed up for 30 years, but it finally got taken down, and I have no idea what happened to it. But this performance has lived on in photographs in such a marvelous, fresh, everlasting way. It's very, very ironic, I think, that that happened. But I remember that morning, I remember thinking, this is crazy. What am I doing here? But I don't know. It's really beautiful, and it really lasted, and it was really quite emotional to be part of it. So.
And I must mention that when I created this mask, it was a very unique experience for me because I had never had that experience of wearing a mask in that way, and it really felt like something had taken me over, and I could, you know, I was just, you know, a vessel or
A medium.
a medium, yeah. I was a conduit, and that was a very, very exciting experience for me, very exciting.
And it shows, you can see it in the photo.
Yeah,
no,
and
it's an extraordinary photo.
And one thing I must mention about our collaborations, I did create a piece that was under the Freeway, an actual piece. And this was a ceremony for that piece, to open it up to the public. But that also was the way we approached a lot of our performances. One or the other of us would have an exhibit, and at the opening of the exhibit, we would then do a performance. And we did so at, what's the name of the gallery, Maren? That Barnsdall Gallery. We did a very significant performance at the Barnsdall Gallery. And so that kind of happened a lot. It allowed us an opportunity to get together and do something because there was already something in place. So therefore we could have a performance once those exhibited.
There was a built-in audience. Mm-hmm. And we often used the same, not used, but we had a group of people. We were close, and we socialized, and we were serious about our art. And they included Ulysses Jenkins. And in this photo next to me, I think it's Frank Parker.
This is Franklin Parker here. Yeah. Ulysses and Frank were our cohorts. And then also we worked with Houston Conwell,
right.
Who has actually in the Schomburg Library in New York, there's a piece of his, I guess you might call it a floor mural. It's part of the floor.
Right, I've read about that. No, absolutely, okay. I know.
Yeah. So those were our buds, and we could all count on each other, you know, and say, hey, let's do this. And Maren might say, oh, that's crazy. But she'd do it anyway. And, you know, we would just do this glorious exploring.
Yeah. I love it. If we could have the next slide, let's look at a performance that Maren organized. This is a piece called Voices from the mid-'80s that was originally performed at the Women's Building in Los Angeles. It features, so I've read about it, I haven't seen video, 6 people led by a conductor, which was Maren once and then was May Soon another time. There was a video component or a video accompaniment by Ulysses Jenkins, and then it featured quotes by Walter Percy, who is an American author and philosopher. Again, Maren, these are images from 2 different performances of Black and White, is I think the earlier one, and then one the following year. But could you, again, describe what's happening in these photos and then talk about Walter Percy's writings, because I think he had a significant impact on your work.
I always have been reading, and I've gotten a lot of, I guess, information from novelists. and Walker Percy was one. And what we're doing here is basically, everybody has words that they say and motions that they make to go with those words. And we're all working in concert, but we're all very separate. And then at the end, we form this sort of, let's go around the maypole kind of dance, but it's around a glowing television set, which I think, you know, had the nightly news on or something.
I saw a photo with Connie Chung from the 1970s or the 1980s, I think.
Yeah. The one where Senga is in the center of the space, that was the Connie Chung one.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was just a slice of life.
Yeah. Senga, would you like to add anything?
Well, we were talking about Ulysses and Parker, and that fellow behind me is Ulysses Jenkins, and he's an incredible video artist and Afrofuturist, and that's him over there as well. And it was just fun, and Maren was the conductor, and, you know, as conductors do, she conducted and we followed. And I think I remember one was the air is full of iron or something like that.
Right.
Each were given a phrase that we had to remember. And that's kind of the part that always makes me nervous. Oh, I have to remember this. So it was just glorious being with people we cared about and doing what we loved.
Man, everybody really rose to the occasion miraculously. Everybody remembered what they were supposed to remember, said it beautifully, said it with emotion and feeling, and moved around beautifully. It was very wonderful to work with a group like that. I mean, you know, up until this point, when you think of an artist, you think of somebody who works alone in a studio somewhere or a loft or something. But we were always working together. And one of the things that we did during this time, we worked in the studio of Ulysses, which was over on Western? No.
It's on Adams, I think.
No, I was thinking about the one that was on, it was near Jefferson and Vermont, that one.
Mm-hmm.
And Rudy Perez came and worked with us, and Mason was there, and others were there, and it was wonderful. It was just wonderful, you know.
Well, talking about that idea of working separately, after, you know, in the 80s, the two of you both left Los Angeles. Senga, you went to Colorado, and Maren, you went to New York and later to Baltimore, where you were head of the Rinehart School of Sculpture at MICA, which many of us in the area are very familiar with. Could you talk about how your practice changed, if it changed once you were no longer living in the same city and you couldn't go to each other's studios daily if you wanted?
No, we couldn't do that, but we had a lot behind us. By the time I went to New York, I went there to be an artist in residence at the Studio Museum. That was 1980, I believe, or maybe it was 84. And, you know, we had done a lot of stuff in the 70s. We actually had done a lot of stuff that never left us and informed whatever it was we did, you know, forever, now even, yeah.
Senga,
And I think, I'm sorry?
I was gonna say, you wanna add anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to add something. We went our separate ways. Maren was over there, and I, you know, was here in Colorado Springs. But we had some very significant life experiences that happened, and to kind of keep our juices flowing. Would you mind me saying, Maren, what happened, or?
Yeah, I mean, it happened.
Okay. Maren, got a divorce, and, she had to tend to her kids on her own. And I had to take care of my mom because, it was a stroke, and she ultimately also had to take care of her mom. So we just kind of kept this line of communication, this fluid line of communication between the two of us. And I'm almost very emotional because we both were set on continuing our work. And so to keep that collaboration going, we would do things like send each other, we do a daily kind of practice. We'd either make up a performance idea every day, or we do an actual drawing or whatever.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the month, we would send that to each other. We'd exchange it. Now, I'm very, very emotional. I don't know why I'm so emotional about this, because it really, it held us steady during the most complicated of times, even though we were thousands of miles apart. And it kept us functioning until some of those kind of edgy things kind of subsided.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were always in communication, whether on the phone or in this mail. And yeah, it was hard times, and those times are over.
Yes.
For a moment.
Yeah, right?
Different kind of hard time. If we could look at the next slide, please. Senga, this is a more recent work that was actually part of the 2017 Venice Biennale. That was an amazing installation you did at the Biennale, I have to say. To my eye, what strikes me about these works is how they give much more weight, both kind of literally and visually, to objects rather than the nylons, including there's a fan you can see in the background, which literally made the nylons like quiver and shudder, like a person shuddering. And to me, it felt much darker than some of the work. I didn't find the humor in it, I'll be honest. Was this kind of a shift in reaction to the moment? And I will reveal that the day I saw this was the day that James Comey was fired. And so there was, we were all in Venice for the vernissage. And I remember having learned the news, and I was like, okay, I got to go look at art. But it was there. So could you talk about this a little bit?
I found these are air conditioned parts. And I was on a residency at Rauschenberg, which was heaven. I said, oh, I've got to find something. And, because I wasn't really sure of what I wanted to do, how I wanted to ground or center the piece. And I just love going to places that have old parts, metal of all sorts. I found this amazing place. They took me to this amazing place that had all sorts of things. And so I grabbed those, and because they had a very sculptural feeling to them. And I like the idea of the fragility of the body up against something that's solid and hard and unyielding. So, yeah.
No, and that conveyed it. And the way the fan activated everything, it was, I mean, it was disturbing and magical all in the same moment.
Yes.
It was amazing. So if we could look at the next slide. Maren, this is a couple examples of your more recent work. And I think on the left is a piece called sit-upons, which are, you take New York Times issues and pages and weave them into mats that people can then sit upon. And you can see this is during the installation at the Museum of Art and Design in New York. And on the right is a piece called Women's Work that was performed at the Walker. And so what I wanted to talk about a little bit is how collaboration, which obviously was such a pivotal part of your relationship with Senga and for so many decades, how that became important in kind of the broader arc of your practice, both in the creation of the work and then in the reception. Could you talk about that a bit?
Well, we had a collaboration which extended to many people. And then we would do these, at another event, at an opening, for example, then we would gather with these people and do something.
Right.
And so all of this working together with people I guess that kind of set the situation here. And it's always sort of been with me that it shouldn't just be me doing it. It should be everybody doing it, and it should be everybody doing it so everybody can see everybody doing it, and everybody in fact can do it because it's a universal thing. And somehow in the doing together, we become united. And it's kind of a political statement in a way, I guess. I mean, it's as political as I get. These sit-upons are from the New York Times newspaper, which is the paper of record, and it has everybody's story in it. And it's also something I learned how to do when I was a child as a campfire girl, which was also a wonderful experience of being with all kinds of girls and young women from all kinds of backgrounds, and learning about that, and having this Campfire Girls was very much involved with Native American lore and history from the very beginning. From the very beginning, when I was part of that, we were talking about Native America, and I don't know, there's just something about having the New York Times and then making it into seats, which many people could sit on, and all of those stories being part of it. So many stories. And then when we're sitting together, almost like a sewing bee, but what are we doing? We're twisting New York Timeses. I don't know, there's something about it that seems very holistic for me, and it's kind of curative. It feels very wholesome and healing.
Right. Well, I've gotten the international signal that said it's time to open things up for questions.
Okay.
So let me look at the questions here and see if I can find some. This is a question from Mackenzie Stevens, and it says, I'm curious about the use of rose petals in RSVP. Are they meant to be fragrant, adding another layer to a multi-sensual experience, or simply symbolic?
They're adding a fragrance. I collected those rose petals and dried them, and they had a distinct fragrance to them. And so again, I wanted to add another layer of with it. And if one gets close enough, one can smell those fragrances.
It's kind of like sachet.
Yes, exactly that.
Right.
Exactly that.
And here's a question for you, Maren. It says, Maren, it's from, do you feel at all that you were able to return to your original dreams of dance through performance art? Did it feel like a metamorphosis from the original aspiration?
Well, it's definitely a metamorphosis from the original, where I saw myself as part of Martha Graham's company, cuckoo, that was me. But I think that from a 5-year-old, I was in creative dance classes where we jumped over phone books, in our little sunshine.
We all did that.
Right.
I did
So
that.
may I add something to that? Maren was talking about the Freeway Fets and how in photographs and documentation, it's lived on. And we talk about this sometimes, how funny it is that Maren has, been seen as a dancer activating my pieces, and she is able to do it on a solo level, which if she had joined Martha Graham's ensemble, she might have not been seen at all. I mean, she just would have been part of the core. And this way, she has something very uniquely hers as movement.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing is, there was no time limitation. I mean, if you decided that you wanted to do something together tomorrow, I could stagger through it somehow.
Yeah.
Better watch out what happens after this conversation, then you might get that ass.
No, we're officially not doing it.
Oh, you're retired?
Yeah, but then I came back.
Like so many people who go into retirement.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a good question. You both talk about how wonderful it was working in LA in the years that you were both here, because this is from an LA viewer, obviously, and we're collaborating. What were the challenges and struggles? They clearly existed.
Well, we made kind of our own beautiful world, I might say, even though the establishment, the art establishment, was not recognizing us, particularly at the moment. We were able, because LA is very multicultural, we were able to work as people of color in our own special way, the way we wanted to. So Maren mentioned Mason and some other people, Rudy Perez and so on. So we were able to enjoy our culture, be our culture, experience our culture in new ways together, that the establishment, had no time for, in a sense. So it really gave us confidence and joy to work together, and Nobuko Miyamoto, to working together to, do something really special that wasn't suppressed by the majority culture putting their thing on it.
And I have to say that the things we did were, if you had to put them in a category, would be more like visionary ideas as opposed to downright political realities. Mm-hmm. Putting on that yellow cape, mm-hmm. and becoming somebody else, mm-hmm. and dancing under a freeway. I mean, I'd call that visionary.
Mm-hmm.
This is a question that relates to something that we talked about, and then because we were running short on time, I didn't have a chance to ask, but I'll ask this question and with the follow-up that I'm interested in. It says, to both Senga and Maren, are you working on projects that respond in any way to the present moment of civil and political unrest? And we talked yesterday about how I have been reading this book by Darby English that looks at how Blackness is represented at MoMA over the years, and about the representation of Black artists at MoMA over the years. And I was struck by how the demands that were rightly made in the 60s and 70s for a more inclusive, equitable representation of artists at the museum, both in exhibitions and collecting, rang very familiar with what is happening now. But what it was then was Faith Ringgold writing letters to William Rubin, and now it's all happening on social media. So if you could answer this question about, the viewer has asked about kind of making work to the political moment, the current moment, but if you could also talk about if this somehow feels different, is what happening now feel different to you?
Oh yeah, it's very different.
How so?
Very different. I think there are much more support for unity than there ever was before, much. I think Black Lives Matter made a big difference. Mm-hmm. And I think you can see it in the public demonstrations. Well, in New York, at least. I don't know. I shouldn't be speaking about more than New York. That's all I know. But
it's here as well.
And DC as well.
It's like amazing to see all the crowds and the color of all the crowds. And they're all colors.
And I think I think something that has made a major difference is something very simple, and that's the camera. And it's extraordinary, the camera as art, in a sense, because there's always that issue of, well, does art really make a difference? Does it really move things forward? And I think if I look at the camera as art, it's the sole thing that has stimulated all of this. Just this one simple camera that showed the real, showed something happening that was real. This happens all the time. This has happened since the beginning of our time in America. But now with the camera, all of these things are being shown, and it's impossible to see it and not think, oh my God, you know, what the hell? And so you know, you cannot deny this stuff, and that has stimulated people, you know, to move in this way, you know,
right.
really seeing real things happen has made a significant difference.
Yeah. And mixed in somehow with this pandemic, it is just, I don't know, it just seems to be occurring to people how close we all are and how precious it all is, and that we need to work on it harder.
For our
labor.
existence, you know,
And do the labor. We need to do the labor. We need to do the work. Well, I would like to use that as a way to close the program. I want to thank Maren and Senga really for taking the time to do this today, and to thank you for your time over the last few weeks. Our conversations that we had leading up to this have been a highlight for me over the last few weeks, and I'm looking forward to the time that the three of us can get in a room or have a drink together in real life.
Yeah, thanks, Evelyn.
Sure. Thank you to both of you. But and just as I close, I'd like to just say that Senga and Maren were both generous enough to contribute to the Hirshhorn Artist Diaries project, which is this amazing living archive that resulted from the Hirshhorn asking living artists to record videos responding to our current moment. Your two videos are particularly powerful. They're all so different, and it's one of the great things about the archive is getting that variety of artist voices. But yours are particularly powerful. So I'd like to encourage everyone, if they have time, to view them on our website. And there is a hashtag, because that's what we do, called Hirshhorn Inside Out. So I want to thank everybody today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.